Ensworth is a kindergarten through 12th grade co-educational independent school. The school promotes academic excellence and inspires students to be intellectually curious, to use their talents to the fullest, to be people of integrity, and to be contributors to society. Good afternoon, Ensworth Middle School. Welcome to all students, faculty, parents, judges, and friends and family watching the live stream on ESPN. A special welcome to these 6 amazing 8th graders sitting before you. Welcome everyone to the 2025 Ensworth Presidential Debates. My name is Chris Humphreys, and as most of you know by now, I teach history here at Ensworth. It has been an amazing year in our classes as we have studied history starting with the origins of civilization all the way up to listening to Bob Dylan and Marvin Gaye sing Vietnam War protest songs. In 6th, 7th, and 8th grade classes, the history faculty have pushed our students to become better, more informed citizens of the world and to connect the lessons of the past with the problems of today. One problem I currently have is that they have shortened the time for this year's debate to 55 minutes. So you are all safe from bad Canadian jokes this year. Now to our judges. I originally had long, eloquent, effusive intros for each judge, but last night I was practicing today's program and my wife commented that if I'm truly pressed for time, perhaps I should simply talk less. So here is ChatGPT's response to the prompt: make these intros shorter and not boring. This year I will start with Dr. Capone. Dr. Capone, you do everything, and I mean everything for our school. Thank you for all of that everything, and thank you for being here today. Next is Mr. Stabler. ChatGPT summarized Mr. Stabler as birds. You'll have to just trust me, Mr. Stabler, when I tell you I have all kinds of other great things to say about you, but I'll save them for next year when we can schedule 2 hours for the debate. Oh, I see Dean is back. Honestly, I didn't even invite Mr. Schneider. I just kind of assumed he would show up because there was a free lunch. And here he is. No, I'm just kidding, Mr. Schneider. Thank you for always being here for us. And finally, Ms. Sandwith. Not even ChatGPT could summarize all that Ms. Sandwith has meant to Ensworth over her career as history's greatest librarian. She has loved every child, encouraged every colleague, supported every administrator, and made each and every family of the Ensworth community feel welcome and special, mine included. For many of us, when we move on or retire, the memory of our time at a school will actually fade fairly quickly. New kids come, the excitement of a new school year takes over, new staff and faculty join. I know that this will not be the case for Ms. Sandwith. Every book that gets checked out, every story that is read to a kindergarten class, and every Noodle Tools citation will always have a little bit of Ms. Sandwith's love along with it. Thank you. Moving on, parents of our debate participants, thank you for coming, and thank you for raising such awesome children. This is an inspiring group of passionate students, and we've been lucky to be their teachers this year. And now to the main event. Each section of 8th grade history has selected one representative to participate in this year's presidential debate. From 801, representing Harry Truman, is Yeva Diachenko. From 802, representing George Washington, is Aaron Evans. From 803, representing Theodore Roosevelt, is Charlie Shader. From 804, representing Harry Truman, is Ollie Dyer. From 805, representing Ulysses S. Grant, is Vivian Nixon. And from 806, representing Franklin Delano Roosevelt, is Theo Berkeley. Our debate today will begin with opening statements, followed by prepared questions and responses from each participant. Following that will be time for open questions and responses, and finally, concluding statements. As I say every year, we have spent all of 8th grade history attempting to view historical events from various perspectives. That is the central focus of our whole program. This year, we have encouraged all participants to refrain from any personal attacks towards their opponents and instead focus on policy, ideology, legacy, and governance. Audience, please keep applause polite and professional. Do not yell out, and make sure you are supporting all of our finalists. Without further ado, let us begin. The order of opening remarks has been randomly selected, and Vivian will go first. Please try to keep your openings under the allotted time.
Ulysses S. Grant was a huge contributor to the Union's victory in the Civil War. Without him, the Union might have fallen into the hands of the Confederacy, and our country might look different than today. Grant was born in Point Pleasant, Ohio on April 27, 1822. He graduated from the West Point Military Academy in 1843 and later served in the Mexican-American War and the Civil War, where he was a general. His military skills were some of the best of his time, and it helped impact his leadership and strategic thinking. After winning the Civil War, his popularity spiked as a result of his victory at Fort Donelson, where the South surrendered, and earned him the name Unconditional Surrender. This led him to run for president. He ran during the election of 1868 and won by a landslide. During Grant's presidency, he advocated for the rights of Native Americans, created Yellowstone National Park, and helped to ratify the 15th Amendment, which gave African Americans the right to vote. Overall, Ulysses S. Grant helped to improve environmental protection and civil rights for everyone, as well as improve the overall state of America.
Next, we will have Charlie representing Theodore Roosevelt.
In 1901, President McKinley was assassinated and left a broken nation leaderless at the beginning of a new century. Vice President Theodore Roosevelt became the youngest and best president ever at 42 years old. The great conservationist, Roosevelt cherished the American identity and its connection to the American wilderness. To preserve our wilderness, Roosevelt quadrupled the amount of protected land. He secured 130 million acres, an area greater than the entire country of Spain. A defender of liberty, his revolutionary Roosevelt corollary stated that the United States had a responsibility to help land American nations and defend them from European aggression. This grand move shifted the United States from an isolated nation concerned only with itself to a bastion of liberty and democracy. A charismatic man of peace, Roosevelt believed nations should settle disputes through diplomacy first. His work in negotiating an end to the bloody Russo-Japanese War made him the first American to win a Nobel Peace Prize. He then gave his prize money back to the American people. His work laid the foundation for organizations like the United Nations today. The champion of our economy and small businesses, Roosevelt helped the economy of the United States grow in a healthy way. Roosevelt built the Panama Canal, which is still one of the most valuable trade routes today. Roosevelt's regulation of big business, also known as trust busting, ensured large corporations would not become monopolies, therefore allowing small businesses to thrive. Roosevelt was a great conservationist, a defender of liberty, a charismatic man of peace, and a champion of our economy and small businesses. Theodore Roosevelt was the 26th President of the United States and is still the greatest to this day. Thank you.
Next, we will have Theo and FDR.
The 32nd President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, is the best president the world has ever seen. Not because he was perfect, but because he led with the vision of America, courage, and resilience during hard times. He guided our nation through World War II and the Great Depression, two of the most catastrophic crises the world has ever encountered. With the New Deal, FDR reshaped the relationship between the government and its people, providing jobs, stabilizing the economy, and laying the foundation for the future U.S. Yes, he had his flaws. His decision to incarcerate the Japanese remains a controversial decision, but leadership is not about clean records. It's about rising to unexpected challenges and changing the course of history. In his first inaugural address, he stated, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." FDR transformed fear into hope with his fireside chats, inspired millions, and helped craft the post-war order that promoted peace and prosperity for decades. No other president reshaped the American government, restored public confidence, and helped save democracy at home and abroad as well as he did. That is why, even with his imperfections, FDR remains the greatest president in American history.
Next will be Aaron, representing George Washington.
George Washington, our nation's first leader when our country was at its worst. He navigated the struggles of a weak country and always did what he thought was best. Before becoming president, Washington had a strong presence in the army. At a young age, he joined the colonial army, and as he progressed through the ranks, he found himself as commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. His actions in that war are ultimately what led him to become president. During his presidency, Washington had a strong presence in foreign and domestic affairs. His foreign affairs mostly consisted of staying neutral in the war between Britain and France, as France had been America's ally during the Revolutionary War, but Washington knew that if America joined the war, they would be left with nothing. He decided to stay neutral so our country would have time to rebuild and reset. Also, Washington knew that a lot needed to be changed in our government. He added things such as the presidential cabinet and the Supreme Court, both of which had a powerful impact on our country and are still used today. Washington was also very popular. He was the only president to be unanimously elected for 2 terms, but he understood the importance of stepping down for president and left after 2 terms, even though he could have run again. He believed the country needed to learn how to elect a new president and didn't want presidency to be too similar to the British rule they had just escaped. George Washington made our country the place it is today and set the precedent for every president following him. Washington did so many things that impacted our country, all of which we will never forget.
Next is Ollie, representing Truman.
Let the dust settle. Harry S. Truman is the greatest president of all time. The 3 main things Truman did during his presidency were drop the atomic bomb on Japan, desegregate the military and federal workforce, and implement the Marshall Plan. First, in 1945, Truman dropped the first of 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima. Just 3 days later, he would drop one on Nagasaki. This decision overall saved hundreds of thousands of lives by preventing an all-out land war with Japan. Second, Truman desegregated the military. This decision brought peace and unity back to the U.S. and was a massive step moving forward towards equality. And lastly, Truman implemented the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan provided economic aid, support, and funding to Europe to help them recuperate after the war effort. For these 3 reasons and more, Truman is widely regarded as one of the greatest presidents in U.S. history. Truman was a man who let the dust settle. And as the dust settles, a veil unfolds, a veil that is clear to historians and politicians alike. Harry S. Truman is the greatest president of all time.
And finally is Eva, also representing Harry Truman.
Truman never asked to be the president. In fact, not even Truman thought he had what it takes to lead the nation. Yet, when history called, he stepped up and proved he was exactly the leader America needed. Truman became president in one of the most dangerous times in history, right near the end of World War II. After only 82 days as vice president, he had to make one of the hardest decisions ever, whether to use the atomic bomb. He made the call, took full responsibility, and helped bring the war to a quick end, saving millions of lives. But his leadership went far beyond that. He launched the growing airlift to stop Soviet aggression without firing a single shot. He led the U.S. into the Korean War to defend democracy and to stop the spread of communism, as well as he rebuilt the world with the Marshall Plan, created NATO, and stood firm against the Soviet Union. At home, he fought for civil rights, desegregated the military, and standing up for equality, even when it wasn't popular. Truman didn't just lead. He led with courage, principle, and action. That's why he's not just a good president. He is one of the greatest.
Thank you, everyone. I neglected to introduce a 5th judge that we have here today, and I just want to make sure that I do that while you all are sitting there thinking, who's that 5th judge? This is Julia Grace Lind. Julia Grace won the presidential debate 4 years ago, my first year hosting. So let's give Julia Grace a round of applause. And And back to the debate. Now we will have each student ask a prepared question of another president. These exchanges should remain under 2 minutes total for the question, response, and clarification rebuttals. Our first pairing will be Vivian asking Aaron a question.
After the Revolutionary War, America was hit with a national debt which Washington could not fix, and instead had to seek advice from Alexander Hamilton to solve the problem for him. The Museum of American Finance said that the federal government was essentially bankrupt, its bonds nearly worthless. How does this prove Washington's financial leadership was stable during his presidency?
Because the U.S. had just come out of the Revolutionary War, they were in a lot of debt. According to Mount Vernon, during the war, the Continental Congress performed the duties of the Treasury Department. However, because they lacked the ability to tax, the currency received and printed by Congress lost value very quickly. Because of this, after the war, the U.S. would need a plan. Alexander Hamilton was the Secretary of Treasury in the newly formed presidential cabinet, meaning he had the job of overseeing the management of the country's finances and obligations. He created a financial plan that would ensure the stability of the nation's finances. Hamilton didn't do the job for him. The president isn't supposed to know everything, and that is why Washington created the presidential cabinet. Future presidents would have others to advise them in their foreign and domestic affairs. Having created the cabinet showed Washington's financial leadership because he realized that the Continental Congress could enforce the necessary laws that would allow for successful finances. He knew he had to make a change.
American Battlefield Trust says that now saddled with debts, state and nation, with outstanding loans and states unwilling to help generate revenue through import taxes, the new country faced a grim economic future. How did Washington specifically assist Hamilton to help the United States during this time?
Well, he gave him the platform to show his knowledge in Treasury, and he gave him without the presidential cabinet, he wouldn't be able to use that to help with the financial instability. So he used his knowledge and gave Alexander Hamilton the chance to save our country from a financial crisis.
Thank you. Next, we will have Charlie asking Ollie a question.
Truman made some terrible mistakes that allowed millions of people to fall under the rule of communism and authoritarianism. His lack of negotiating skills at the Potsdam Conference led to the Soviets gaining the upper hand and drawing Eastern Europe and the Balkans under their control. Truman's failures were also apparent in East Asia. When China fell to the communists, the Allied-backed nationalists were forced to flee to Taiwan. How can Truman be the best president if he did not stand for liberty and democracy abroad?
I would have to say that the Soviet spread of communism was better attributed to the weakened states of Eastern European institutions, creating an environment where radical ideologies like communism had a better chance of overtaking the nation. From the International Churchill Society, Winston Churchill and Stalin met, agreeing to split Eastern Europe through percentages. It's clear Truman could not have entirely affected communism in Eastern Europe. Cities and historians also say that the fall of China and communism was largely attributed to an increase in peasant support and the GMD's ineffective governmental system. Truman was never the leading cause in either country's falling to communism. Ideas of Truman's want for democracy were shown through the Truman Doctrine when he supported European countries, emphasizing the importance of freedom.
Nations that fell to communism like Czechoslovakia and Poland were our allies in World War II, and Truman forsake them and did not help them when they most needed it. He let them fall under the influence of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, instead of giving their people freedom and liberty and allowing them to live life to their fullest.
I don't think that Truman can be blamed when considering that Stalin and Churchill met for what Churchill himself described as a dirty deal in which they split up Eastern Europe. I don't think it was largely attributed to his speaking in the Potsdam Conference and more so about their private meeting without Truman being in consideration.
Thank you. Our next group will be Theo asking Eva a question.
Given that President Truman called for the creation of the CIA to preserve democracy, what should we think of the agency's later involvement in assassinations and coups, actions that have caused millions of deaths, revolutions, and destabilization of governments throughout the world?
Truman created the CIA to prevent another surprise attack like Pearl Harbor, not to run secret wars. He never meant for it to be used in assassinations or coups, which most of them happened after he left the office. You can't blame Truman for how other presidents misused what he started with good intentions. As well, though some of actions that CIA did were controversial, they stopped threats like communism in Guatemala and helped defend the country after the 9/11.
If Truman started the CIA with good intentions, then why did Truman not set a plan for what the CIA should do? What it should do?
Well, first of all, I don't think Truman couldn't control the CIA after he left the office. So that's more of the next President Eisenhower problem to deal with the CIA. And another thing, CIA was we needed CIA to protect the U.S. from KGB, which is the main intelligence security of the USSR, especially in Cold War.
Thank you. And next, we will have Aaron asking Charlie a question.
During Theodore Roosevelt's presidency, he was known for his sometimes extreme presence in American imperialism, nationalism, and expansionism. In 1903, Roosevelt wanted to add the Panama Canal to the U.S. and decided to create a rebellion in Panama to ensure the U.S. was allowed to build and control the Panama Canal, even after the Colombian government didn't allow it. This action was very successful in growing American interest in expansion. However, it was very criticized because it hurt Colombian authority and set a precedent of U.S. interference in Latin American affairs. Why would Roosevelt continue with this plan to control over the Panama Canal if it had previously been denied by the Colombian government and went against how the U.S. had no involvement in Latin American affairs?
Theodore Roosevelt was not a reckless expansionist and did not intend to build an American empire. In fact, less than a year into his presidency, he released Cuba as an independent nation, showing that he respected people's right to self-determination. Roosevelt did intend to build a canal through the Colombian province of Panama, but you failed to mention that the Colombian government signed the Tehran Treaty, agreeing to compensation from the Americans in exchange for a lease of the canal strip and the right to resume the French Canal project. But then the Colombian dictator broke the agreement and demanded more money from the U.S. This severed all trust. The people of Panama had attempted to secede from Colombia many times in the previous years, but when they tried again, the neglected Colombian garrison refused to fight the rebels. This Colombian dictator asked the United States for help, but because the Colombians had broken the treaty, Roosevelt remained neutral. Researching George Washington, you must know that revolutions are often deadly, but because the United States remained neutral, only one person was killed in Panama's final struggle for independence. Roosevelt officially recognized Panama's independence and offered the same terms given to Colombia previously, which the new nation gladly accepted to the benefit of its citizens and world trade as a whole.
You said that the treaty split. Why would Roosevelt continue with this plan if the goal of the U.S. is to remain neutral and there was no treaty? So why would he continue with this plan to build the Panama Canal if there was no treaty?
Panama was a new nation, and he was going to treat it as such. He was not going to treat it as an extension of Colombia. This is a new nation, and he was going to do business with them like he would do with any other independent nation.
Thank you. Next question will be Ollie asking Theo a question.
Post-World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt made one of the most controversial decisions in U.S. history. He made the decision to intern over 100,000 Japanese Americans. How can you justify these actions, specifically third-generation Japanese Americans, American citizens, and disabled Japanese Americans being imprisoned?
We can see now that the choice FDR made to put into the Japanese internment camps was made in challenging times. At the time, America had experienced the worst attack on itself, killing roughly 3,000 military personnel and causing tens of millions of dollars of damage. Americans were scared of the possibility of Japanese espionage on the West Coast, so in order to soothe these fears, FDR relocated the Japanese. I do not agree with the fact he imprisoned the number of Japanese he did, including babies, elderly, and disabled, but with today's knowledge, we can see that now more other appropriate measures should have been taken. Additionally, while you can say it was due to FDR's prejudice against the Japanese, a poll from the Holocaust Museum states that 93% of Americans at the time agreed with FDR's choice to incarcerate the Japanese. At the time, it was for the greater good, and things must be done in war to focus on battles. With more than 80 years of hindsight, we can question the decision he made, but at the time of the attack and mass hysteria, the decision was not opposed.
So, do you think that if a European nation or a predominantly white nation had attacked the U.S., we should imprison as many white people in the U.S. as we can?
I do not agree with the fact, but if that were to happen now, we could see with what FDR did as the first he would do, that we could see what went wrong and what we could do better now, which is the action that we would take.
Thank you. And our last part of this round will be Eva asking Vivian a question.
How can Grant be trusted when he defended his staff after they were caught stealing tax money in 1875 and stayed silent when his vice president was involved in taking bribes from a fake railroad company that was really just a front for corruption?
Although Grant did have such events as the whiskey ring scandal of 1875 and the credit mobilier incident of 1864 to 1867, we can look at these incidents from Grant's side of the story. While he faced much backlash from these, he used them to improve his presidency. His loyalty to his staff members was exceptional. Miller Center said that his honesty was never questioned and he did not personally benefit from any of these scandals. And although the credit mobilier incident did affect Grant's administration, he helped fix the economy later by advocating for the Public Credit Act, which helped to improve the economy and money issues.
If Grant really cared about honesty in the government, how could he protect the vice president who took bribes from a fake railroad company instead of demanding accountability?
Grant was very in sync with his vice president, and they both agreed on many of the same things. So his vice president may have been right in the sense that he knew what he was talking about at the time. And even though he's often associated with his vice president during this incident, it's said that despite the scandals that arose during this, Grant was never personally involved with any of them.
He did, in fact, defend his vice president in court when the situation happened.
He may have defended him because he agreed with him at the time and didn't have enough background information because he wasn't personally involved. Thank you.
Okay, let's give him a hand for that round of. Great job, everyone. We will now have time for open questions and answers. These questions have not been shared in advance, and each response should be limited to around 60 seconds. A rebuttal response is encouraged, and an order of questioners was determined ahead of time, and Vivian will go first.
Okay, I have a question for Aaron. During the Revolutionary War, Washington repeatedly put his men in danger and in very dangerous situations. And how does this prove that his military tactics were well thought out and good for his men?
Washington was known, he was the commander-in-chief of the army, and he had the responsibility of doing what was best for the country, and he knew that certain sacrifices had to be made if he wanted the war to end sooner. So if he didn't make those certain decisions, the war would have gone on longer and we would have lost more lives.
Since he did these dangerous things, what's to say that he didn't make some of those dangerous accidents whenever he was president?
Well, he learned from his mistakes, and he learned that staying neutral in wars is what saves a nation, and he put that forth in his message as a president. So he knew that if he learned that our country had lost a lot of lives during that war, and he took that and put that into his presidency and knew that we shouldn't do that in future times.
Thank you. Our next questioner will be Charlie.
I have a question for Vivian as Grant. After the Civil War, the United States needed to reform a strong union while also securing the rights of African Americans. This period was known as Reconstruction, and Grant was not the leader the country needed. Grant failed to secure the rights of African Americans and the citizens, and he made no progress addressing discrimination in the South. Grant failed so miserably that the federal government abandoned all attempts at securing African American civil rights in the South. How can Grant be the best president if he failed to address the most pressing problems of his day?
As I mentioned earlier, Grant was the reason that the 15th Amendment was ratified, and this made it so that he may have not completely solved the issues of civil rights, but he definitely put it in a step in the right direction.
Was the 15th Amendment adequately enforced? Was he able to back up his policies with actual action? Or did he just let the South gain power and oppose his policies?
During this time, he was also using the United States Army to essentially protect African Americans. And though this may not be mentioned in many sources, he was still working hard to get the start of an act that went on to later be successful.
Thank you. Now we'll have Theo ask a question.
I have a question for you, Eva. Summarizing a quote from the Truman Archives, Truman is on record saying numerous racist things against ethnic groups, including Asians and African Americans. How would these views Truman held affect his decision-making regarding ethnic groups during his presidency?
Okay. First of all, I would like to say that Truman was born in Missouri in 1884, which is a time and place where racism sadly was very common, and that's kind of just shows how people were raised. And second of all, unlikely many people at this time, Truman changed. He grew as a leader, and his actions showed progress even if past words were wrong. And even though Truman did use racist language, he later took real actions, like desegregating the military in 1948.
Thank you. Aaron, do you have a question for someone?
I have a question for Ollie. The Red Scare was a period of intense fear driven by the threat of communism. Many innocent people were arrested and lost their basic rights. Do you think Truman's decision to sacrifice citizens' basic rights over an issue was what should have been done?
I do, but I don't think he was sacrificing the citizens' basic rights. When you say the Red Scare, like I know like what the Red Scare is, but like what specific part of the Red Scare, like leading into the Korean War, or like what segment of it are you speaking about?
Mostly the beginning, like the earlier segment in time when he like arrested people that majority of which had no, they didn't commit any crime or didn't do anything.
Like, for example, General MacArthur, or like just the common public?
Like both, but mostly the public.
I mean, I'm not on record that I'd have to believe that Truman did any of that, so I mean, there's really no response. Like, specifically, if we were to talk about redlining or firing MacArthur in terms of the going into the Korean War, I'd have to say that that was justified, but like, for the common public, I mean, yeah, I'd have to agree.
Thank you. And Ollie, it's your turn to ask a question.
Okay. I have, well, I can't ask it again, so unfortunately I have another question for you, Theo. Sorry. FDR's second proposed Bill of Rights said that all Americans had the right to a job, an adequate wage, a home, and medical care, as well as a good education. How can you justify FDR's hypocrisy when going against his earlier statements, imprisoning Japanese American citizens, stripping them of their amendment rights that he had previously stated were natural?
As stated in my response, FDR was in a time of crisis and the first attack on America in history. So FDR had to take matters fast to deal with the oncoming onslaught of citizens who were scared and the possibility of espionage.
So, could you answer that? Could you answer my question on how you could justify his hypocrisy and how, even though he went against his earlier statements about what he believed in?
I just said during the war, he had to take matters in the time of crisis and hysteria. He had to focus on the battles that were happening, including the Battle of Midway and everything after it.
Okay, so you're saying that his earlier statements are justified, but it's based on the changing times?
Yes, in the war.
Thank you. And Yeva, your turn to ask a question.
I also have a question for FDR. How can FDR's choice to recognize the Soviet Union in 1933 be seen as acceptable if it meant ignoring a famine that killed millions in Ukraine just to help U.S. trade? Even Harvard Ukrainian study said FDR neither acknowledged the famine nor criticized the measures implemented by the Soviet Union against the sovereign people.
When was the time period?
1933.
Well, FDR had to focus on his country as he was president of the United States of America. He was focused on the Great Depression and the fact that the employment rate was 25%. He was taking his time and focus on getting the New Deal passed and minimizing the effects of the Great Depression on Americans.
How would you justify that his trust in Stalin then led to the spread of communism in Eastern Europe?
Can you repeat the question?
How would you justify that because he trusted Stalin, then led to the spread of communism in Eastern Europe later?
I do not believe FDR can solely be blamed for this, as there are numerous other leaders in the Allies, including Churchill. So I don't think it's fair to solely credit FDR for the spread of communism in Eastern Europe.
Thank you. Vivian, would you have a question for Charlie?
I do.
Thanks.
Yes. Okay. Did Theodore Roosevelt really consider the effect of the foreign policy in the Panama Canal on the generations to come?
He did. His Roosevelt corollary, I believe that's what you're referring to, allowed the United States to help Latin American nations when they needed it to protect from European aggression.
Okay. And Charlie, it's your turn to ask a question.
I have a question for Aaron. In 1795, mobs took to the streets in outrage, condemning George Washington and his negotiator John Jay for selling out American interests to Great Britain. In the Jay Treaty, the Jay Treaty sought to pacify Great Britain at all costs by caving to their demands. British forces were allowed to search American ships that were allowed to collect pre-Revolutionary War debt, and they could seize goods from France, severing trade deals with our oldest ally. How can George Washington be the best president if he promoted this embarrassment of a treaty that was hated by the public?
So the goal of the treaty was to, because there was a possibility of war, like there's lots of tension between America and Britain. So, and the British was resisting opening its ports to American ships, which was violating sections of the Treaty of Peace that separated the United States from Britain. So John Jay went and settled the disputes, and when he came back with the treaty, it was getting so much heat because before the Senate had time to discuss the treaty, that like unauthorized bits of it had been released. So like everybody was going around and like they didn't understand what was happening, and they hadn't had time to discuss and make edits to the treaty and make it so it was equal for both sides.
The only two benefits John Jay got from the Jay Treaty was a title that we were a most favored nation in trade with Great Britain, and that the British were being forced to leave forts in Maine, which they were already supposed to in the Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War. Washington and Jay could have taken a far more firm stance, like Sweden and Denmark, that were defending their neutrality, but instead he rolled over and sold out American interests.
To respond to that, I mean, Washington's main goal was neutrality, and he believed in not causing tension between other countries, and he believed that starting doing a treaty would be the best option, and if that didn't work, which it ended up working, he would have had another option, and he would have gone in with more force.
Thank you. And Theo, it's your turn to ask a second question.
I have a question for all. President Truman initiated the fire bombings of Tokyo, killing anywhere between 100,000 and 125,000 civilians in Tokyo, the majority of these being women, children, and elderly Japanese people. Left over 125,000 civilians injured to the point of no recovery and no possibility of working and helping repairs. And over 1 million civilians were left homeless, billions of dollars of damage through fires and time spent rebuilding, and goes against Conventions 1 and 4 of the Geneva Convention, according to Cornell Law School. How can you justify those actions?
I think in every president's history, from Washington up until today, every president's made a mistake, and there's no real perfect justification for Truman's actions here. I think that what made Truman such a good president was his ability to bounce back from moments like these and to keep moving forward. He said himself, let the dust settle. He made decisions within hours. He was a great decision maker. I think he made a mistake there, and he took accountability for his actions, and there's no perfect justification in that situation, but it is what it is.
So within 7 months of the firebombings, he also dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan.
Yeah, so that decision was calculated. In Japanese culture, surrender is rare. And so that decision, I believe, also was justified because it prevented land war with Japan. And a lot of people would argue that it actually saved lives overall because despite it killing hundreds of thousands, it saved American lives and Japanese lives from going out to a war, prolonging World War II for extremely much longer time than it was. It ended it swiftly and abruptly. I think it was the most efficient way to do so.
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you. And we still need a second question for Vivian, Charlie, and Yeva. So, Aaron, do you have a question for one
I
of
have a
those?
question for Charlie.
Great.
According to History.com, Roosevelt didn't see Black Americans as equals, but instead he said, as a race and in the mass, they are altogether inferior to the whites. How can he be a good president if he didn't see all his citizens of the U.S. as equal?
Do you know the context of that quote?
No, not specifically.
Not specifically. I think we should take that quote in context with the rest of his individual actions as president. His square deal, or fair deal, was based on individual merit and giving every single person a fair deal and treating them equally. I do not think we can just take one quote with no context and say that Roosevelt's presidency was compromised by that.
Ollie, would you have a question for Yeva? Oh, right. Ollie, would you have a question for Vivian?
Yes, I do. Hi, Vivian. From 1871 to 1875, distillers and governmental officials evaded federal taxes to save money. Orville Babcock was directly related to these actions and was avidly defended by Grant, with Grant even firing the prosecutor, suggesting Grant's involvement. How can you justify Grant's actions throughout the whiskey ring scandal?
Like you said earlier, I feel like he's one of those presidents where he has had some corruption in his presidency, and that doesn't necessarily justify anything. But this was one of those situations where I don't think that he heard the entire story, and that may be one of the reasons that he didn't, one of the reasons that he kind of backed up. He backed up the other people during the whiskey ring scandal.
So why do you think he fired a prosecutor suggesting Grant's involvement in the scandal? Do you think it was what reason do you think he did it for? Do you think it was to try and hide up something, or do you think it was justified?
I think it was justified because at the time there was, what time frame was this from specifically?
Just throughout the entirety of the whiskey ring scandal. So this was post, I think it was 1870s, mid 1870s roughly.
Okay, so during the 1870s, this was his second presidency, and as I've read before, during Grant's second presidency was whenever things kind of started to take a downhill route for him, and though he had done many good things in his first time, during his first presidency, because he was elected twice, the second presidency was the time when things sort of got out of control, and I guess you could say that, and then, but I don't know if it's technically justified what he did.
All right. We're going to have Yeva ask anyone who would like a question, and then Vivian, if I could get you to ask Yeva another question, that'll wrap up this round of questioning. Everyone will have got 2 questions. So you can ask anyone you like.
Okay, so I have a question for Teddy Roosevelt. Earlier in a debate, you said that Teddy Roosevelt did his best to try to respect people's rights. Then, if that is true, how can you justify that if we condemn Hitler and Sparta for trying to control who could reproduce through rude eugenic, how can we overlook Theodore Roosevelt saying, society has no business to permit the generals to reproduce their kind, John Locke Foundation?
That is another quote that is not in any way connected to Roosevelt's policies, especially when his square deal sought to make everyone, to judge people on individual merit instead of color by their skin or genetics. He was well known of appointing people of all backgrounds to important positions, like Charles Anderson, who was an African American. He appointed him as collector of revenue. In Roosevelt's home state of New York, Anderson oversaw Wall Street and New York City. His position was prestigious and well respected by all, and Anderson became a pioneer in government for the African American community. Roosevelt certainly did not promote eugenics in his policies, and I do not see how these quotes compromise the principle.
By him saying that, don't you think it just gives other people permission to dehumanize other people, especially as America was trying to fight segregation at that time?
I think we should judge Roosevelt on his actions instead of one sentence that he said.
Thank you.
Okay, Vivian, do you have a question for Eva?
Yes, I do. How could Truman be aware of the alternatives to the atomic bomb, such as a naval blockade, and still go through with the bombing?
Okay. So the atomic bomb ended the war quickly and saved millions of lives. Most of all, the land invasion would have been killed millions of more, which the land invasion at first was the solution. But the atomic bomb, second of all, atomic bomb would have dropped anyway, since the USSR was developing the atomic bomb at the time as well. And again, Truman and other leaders did warn Japan that the bomb is going to be dropped, but Japan refused to surrender even after the first bomb, which says a lot about their beliefs which were shaped by the militarism in their country.
Do you think that instead of an atomic bomb being dropped on a place that was highly populated, it could have been dropped on an unpopulated island?
I do believe that, I do think that, I don't think that atomic bomb could have dropped anything else. They did calculate the possibilities beforehand, but again, it wasn't just Truman's decision to drop the bomb specifically on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He met with, for example, Churchill and Stalin at the time, and they discussed it, and they decided that that was the most good position to be in.
Great. Let's give our debate participants. That is always the most stressful part of the debate, I think. And now we'll have closing statements. We'll go in reverse order from the opening statements. We'll try to keep these to about 60 seconds each, and Yeva, you're up first.
Usually when we think of great leaders, we think of brain boxes, privileged elites, or people with charisma to spare. But Truman proves that you don't need any of that. He came from nowhere, he was nearly 60, had failed in business, and still changed the course of history. Sure, he wasn't perfect. People criticized him then and still do now. But greatness isn't about being flawless. It's about stepping up when it matters the most. Some men may be born to greatness, and some may have greatness thrust upon them. But it's arguable that none of them will ever be as great as Harry S. Truman. Thank you.
Holly, you are next.
Harry S. Truman is the greatest president of all time. Earlier in this debate, I was questioned about the decision-making of Truman. But what made Truman so intellectual was his ability to make concise, ethical, and moral decisions. Harry Truman was a man of security in a time when the U.S. needed it. And he shall forever be known as one of the wisest men to ever be president, as one of the best decision makers, and as a man with some of the most controversial yet justified actions. Harry S. Truman was a man who let the dust settle. Harry S. Truman is the greatest president of all time.
And Aaron.
George Washington left behind a legacy that we will never forget. Washington helped America get out of a war that could have ended our country. As said in his farewell address, it is our true policy to steer clear of a permanent alliance with any portion of the foreign world. Staying neutral was what saved us. George Washington knew what was best for our country at the time, even if not everyone agreed. And he added the necessary things to the office, creating a more successful and better run national government. The citizens begged him to return after serving his second unanimously elected term, but he knew that Americans needed to learn how to elect, transition, and inaugurate a new president. Washington had the weight of a country in need on his shoulders. He had to make the decisions he felt were best for Americans at the time, even if not everyone agreed. George Washington set our country up for success and made the United States of America the place it is today. George Washington was and forever will be the best president.
And Theo.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt reshaped America and the world in the time he was in office. Japanese incarceration was made in a harsh time, and decisions made with other leaders cannot be solely put on him when he had to focus on his own country. As we can see with the New Deal, he prioritized his citizens as much as any other president would. FDR is ultimately the best president today and forever because of his relationship to the American population.
And Charlie.
Theodore Roosevelt was a great leader and the best president. He was put in a terrible situation at the beginning of an eventful century, and he proved that the United States could open up to foreign powers with Panama and his Roosevelt corollary, while also staying neutral. When he spoke as much as he did, it is clear that you could find a few sentences that didn't quite come out right, and he said terrible things. But we cannot judge him on his words, we must judge him on his actions. I believe after this debate, Roosevelt is the youngest and is still the greatest president of the United States.
And finally, Vivian.
Ulysses S. Grant was one of the most important men involved in the Civil War and making America a great place for future generations. He greatly impacted the future of military careers by serving as an example of the hard work and determination that can help achieve big results. He also impacted the creation of a national economic stability after the Civil War. Miller Center said that Grant's military victory helped inspire people like Abraham Lincoln and William Sherman. His political leadership was unique because of his offensive strategies that helped him win a victory against the South and make the United States a better place. This proves that though he had some hardships, Grant's presidency, in Grant's presidency, his good outweighed the bad.
And that concludes our 2025 presidential debate. As always, thank you to everyone for being here today. Thank you especially to our judges. Students, you are a great audience, and I hope that this has inspired you to set your sights on being up on the stage next year or the year after. We will announce the winners to the middle school on Wednesday morning at the final assembly. Once 6th and 7th grade have gone to hook up, 8th graders, please come down and congratulate your class representatives and friends on an amazing debate. Participants, please stick around to get some pictures after everyone has left. Great job, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and have a great day.